And welcome to our July 2020 meeting, Angeles chapter, California Society for Healthcare Engineering. I'm Phil Harrigan from Providence St. John's Health Center, and I'm Vice President of the LA chapter. Our president, Tom Peterson, is not going to be able to be here this morning because he's in Boston. Go Celtics. For the American Society Healthcare Engineering Annual Convention. Tom is there to receive the ASHE Regional Leadership Award. Well deserved. And I think you've all met Brian Guerrero, our Vice President, and very hardworking. And behind the scenes, controlling virtually everything, is our Zoom czar, Beth Demeter, somewhere in a bunker in Idaho. This meeting is being recorded, and if that works out, then it will be available on the CSHE website. And I'd like to thank our host, St. Francis Medical Center, and Bruce Wookman, the Director of Plant Operations, and the administration of St. Francis for their generous hospitality during these trying times. As you can see, this is a great venue. I think we're going to have to come back here. Breakfast has been provided by ATEC Consulting and Pat Kraft. Thank you very much. Yeah. I also want to thank all our gold and silver sponsors for their continuing support. It allows us to continue to be the conduit for professional growth and quality in the built environment for healthcare in California. Without these gold sponsors and our silver sponsors, we would not be able to continue this operation. Yeah. This is our first meeting in person since we met on January 15th, 2020 at Adventist Health White Memorial, where Tom spoke to us about the Joint Commission standards, and Levu Ursachi talked about the Eagle Rock fire. A lot has happened since then. A lot of things have changed. Santiago Chambers was our president, and he's now the CSHE State Vice President. I was hoping he would be able to make it here this morning, but I don't see him yet. Among his duties at Fountain Valley Hospital, Santiago is the emergency management officer. I share his interest in emergency preparedness. And so I like to start with a safety reminder. In emergency management, we've been occupied with the pandemic, COVID-19, and now monkeypox. LA County Department of Public Health has reported 120 cases of monkeypox as of yesterday in LA. Back when we last met, our greatest fear was a big earthquake, the big one, which of course hasn't happened yet, but the pressure on the San Andreas Fault continues to build every day. So I'd like to take a moment and imagine if the big one hit right now. You're here, what would you do? We're all going to get under the tables and hold on till the shaking stops. Hold on to that table leg so it doesn't bounce away while you're under there, which has happened. When it stops, what are you going to do? You're going to go home or to wherever that prearranged meeting place is for your family? Imagine if the roads are blocked, like after Northridge, freeways came down. Well, the infrastructure has been hardened since then. The freeway overpasses have been hardened. The cell system is better, but who knows what will happen when the big one hits? You might not be able to get home. You have a good go bag in your car, good walking shoes, comfortable socks, water, and paper maps, because the big one hits, the cell system, even if it's working, is going to be overloaded. And with intensive applications like navigation are not going to be available. Paper is still the way to go. My daughter was in Boston when the marathon bombings hit. She worked for Prudential, which was the major sponsor. And when she felt the blasts, she tried to call me. She couldn't get through. She was able to text. It was quite a while before they brought in supplemental cell systems to get the cell system working. Like I say, the cell system has been improved since then, but as soon as that big one hits, everybody's going to be on their phone. So you may be able to text, but probably nothing else. Okay, now I'd like to move on to our presentation. Oh, wait, first, I'd like to meet everybody. I'd like to go around the room and everybody introduce yourself. Tell me who you're with. If you're an affiliate member, let us know what your company does. And if you have any new products or services that we can use, tell us about them. I'm with St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica. I'm now called the project coordinator, just found out. Okay, so welcome.
What are you trying to secretary process?
Excellent. Welcome. Welcome.
Hey everybody, my name is Dan Quinn. I'm also Water Service Solutions.
But of course, it was the next level. I'm wrong, next, my first time. And I was blue sky, restoration.
Morning.
All this other on safety.
Good podcast.
Eric Mosher with Access Supply, we provide for where things of that nature. -3, whatever.
Nina, you can be moving with your heart.
And in the back. Good, thank you, everyone. Welcome. Glad to finally see everyone in person again. I hope this will be able to continue. Sure. Back when we last met in 2020, we talked about the Eagle Rock fire. Of course, since that time, wildfires have only gotten worse. So tonight, we're going to have a speaker talk about smoke gets in the air. The speaker is Michelle Rosales, Principal Consultant at Forensic Analytical Consulting Services. And, Michelle has more than 16 years experience managing complex environmental health and industrial hygiene projects throughout California and the US. These projects conducted in accordance with the requirements of state and federal regulations, including OSHA and EPA. She has managed hundreds of investigations involving a variety of physical, chemical, biological hazards in sensitive occupational and community settings that include healthcare facilities and schools. Welcome, Michelle.
All right, just gonna make a few,
But I could take my mask off. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody here today. What I plan on presenting on is talking about, there we go. Talk a little bit about wildfires. Obviously, we're in Southern California, so all of us are well aware of the impact of wildfires on our communities. As you saw in the news today, London is being hit with a bunch of wildfires, so nobody is no longer immune to the impact of other conditions in the environment. But what we're talking about a little bit today is kind of describing some of the hazardous components and what's actually in wildfires, what is the smoke made of. Then kind of go over some information on how you can help protect your healthcare facility or your home or wherever you may, commercial building you may work in, by listing some of the key elements on having a wildfire emergency plan. As they were previously talking about, everyone we're waiting for that big earthquake to occur. Everyone's having, an earthquake plan, right? At this point in our lives and in living in everybody should have a plan for their specific facility, not prepared when the wildfires are coming, but now and even probably before now. And with these plans, we'll talk a little bit about what's the best way to minimize the impact to the indoor environment during the fires. I'll discuss some ways where we can evaluate the air quality itself and the cleanliness and remediation and restoration that occurs after the fact. And then assist in giving some public information officers some how to prepare statements for the staff and community to let them know what you're doing, what's going on, and how you're trying to protect patients and staff. As I stated, we're not immune to wildfires. They used to say a wildfire season began in late October and ended, a couple of months after. At this point, we know a wildfire can happen at any time. the minute it starts getting a little bit warm, I'm always saying, let's get ready, you know, especially in the summertime. You know, in 2021, I mean, every single year, I've been doing wildfires since 2008, and the last 3 or 4 years have been complete game changers. It's no longer just that fire that's occurring, you know, in the woods, maybe 50 miles away, but now it's burning properties, it's burning, you know, communities. So we know that a lot of people are being impacted by these wildfires, and they're just going to keep increasing as years go by. And their source is still to burn. So what's in the smoke? Smoke is a colloidal mix of solids, liquids, and gases, and it's dependent, the composition is dependent on what's burning. So typically when we're thinking about wildfires, we're thinking about the burning of organic materials, brush, shrubs, you know, grass. And within that, we're creating carbon monoxides being generated, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, aldehydes, acids, VOCs, you name it, a large colloidal mix of different compounds. And what we're typically seeing with regards to impacting adjacent communities is the smoke-related particulates. So although we know all these compounds are created, typically those are things that may just go up into the atmosphere or leave shortly thereafter when you're not specifically in the burn zone. But the smoke-related particulate, which is the char, the ash, and the soot, and those fine particulates are what are being wind-driven and then impacting facilities and locations miles and miles away from the fire event itself. And as I stated, the last few years, it's no longer just burning of forestry 50 miles away. Now we're burning complete communities. So within that, now we're burning new material, and now we have other compounds that can be generated. So when you're burning metals or electronics, you have the potential for PCBs, if anybody knows what that is, chlorinated biphenols to be produced, dioxin, furans. So now you've got this even nastier composition of the smoke that people can be potentially exposed to. And as these photos shows, as I was saying, it's no longer just maybe that one area, but because of winds and the terrains, areas that weren't even near the fire may be heavily impacted. And the photo on A right here is probably the one that best represents that. During the campfire, you have it in Paradise, burning that area. However, the Bay Area was heavily impacted by the air quality, you know, AQI values of over 500 on some days. Although they were maybe 100, 200 miles away from the fire event itself. And this one on the right here is one of Idaho, just pretty much impacted the entire state and areas. So how do we know what the air quality is, and how can we kind of have an understanding of or forecast what's going to happen and be prepared before while the wildfire event is, before it actually hits us? There are a lot of air quality management district data available for us to look at now. I don't know if anybody's ever used their Google Maps, and at this point in time, the AQI value for the location that you're going to visit is now coming up. So everyone is well aware of air quality and trying to determine, how, you know, is it safe for me if I have a sensitive population or somebody with me to kind of visit that area. Some of the most popular ones are the US EPA Air Now, that most people are probably aware of, the California Air Resource Board, and then local air quality management districts have some specific information. But I would like to point out that the air quality districts use a 24-hour average. And sometimes when they're forecasting, it's not just the data that they're getting from their monitors. They calculate it based on the terrain, the location from it. One good example is I was doing a project in Malibu during the Thomas fire, and they have the AQI values being presented. While we're standing there, we're like, this doesn't really make sense of what I'm seeing or smelling. And comes to find out that the closest EPA air quality monitor was in Thousand Oaks. So how is that? You know, to me, it's like, wow, that's a completely different world. But I mean, they do a good job in forecasting and thinking about the terrain, but it's not perfect and it's not always representative. So although these are available for you to look at to kind of see where you are in terms of air quality, they're not always necessarily reliable, which kind of goes into sometimes you may need to do your own air monitoring and evaluating of the space to determine when you're going to start putting specific controls in place will go in when we talk about the preparedness plan. This is just a little slide on how we kind of evaluate the impact, within your facility. First, we want to look at the potential pathways in which the smoke can enter. So we're looking at those areas where we know our exterior entry points. Again, it's an outdoor source trying to come in. So we're looking at exterior entry points. This is for a home, if you had an attic space, obviously that is, where there's potential gable vents or any other vents that could be present. If you're looking at, again, a commercial building, you have outdoor air being introduced through your ventilation system. When we're evaluating, we're also looking at visual observations. Do we see smoke-related particulate, that char and ash settling on surface? Olfactory observations, do we smell it? If we smell it, that means it's here. It's here. You may not necessarily visually see it, but you could smell it. And then when we are evaluating impact, we can do air monitoring, as I discussed, or surface sampling to kind of further evaluate for that. You guys can stop me if you have any questions in between. We're in person now, so if you look confused, I can tell. Okay. So one of the big questions that always come up is, are they infectious? And originally we said no, because it was hot, burned particulates. Whatever was alive must have then died. However, more research is coming about that once you burn that top layer of the material in a fire and forestry, what you have below is now being exposed, soil, that there is a potential that some of these microorganisms may become airborne. They're not necessarily the burned particulate itself, it's after that's gone away, now you have this new particulate. So there's more research being done. There's not a lot of information on how far that material will go up in the air and move, but they are aware that there is a potential for it to be infectious and to be particulate that's being created. So there's more to come once we get more of that information. So what can we do on the state and local level? If you're in California, you should know that California does have a standard on wildfire. Yes. Yes. People always assume it's the outdoor worker only. It is not. It is for buildings in which they don't have mechanical ventilation systems. So 99% of the people in this area are exempt from that because, again, we're working in a healthcare facility, you have very sophisticated ventilation systems. But if you are, maybe say you have it probably really wouldn't make sense over here, but some people may have warehouses that do not have any mechanical ventilation system. So therefore, you would not be exempt from this and would have to have a specific plan in place in controlling exposures to individuals. And they look at AQI values in terms of exposures. And when you hit an AQI of 151 or greater, then things go into place, which is not very high. I mean, if some bad days in downtown Los Angeles with the smog and just a nasty day, you will hit AQI values that high. And then within California, we also not only have that wildfire standard, but there are a lot of other documents and guidance documents that are really nice to read. One that is protecting indoor workers for wildfire smoke with building ventilation systems. So everyone here who does have a ventilation system, California does have a guidance document that kind of goes over some of the things that you can do to protect your workers. So now I'm going to go into a plan. As I stated, at this point, everyone should have something in place of what you're going to do. Not only, and I'm not just talking about where to walk outside when a wildfire event, I'm talking about being prepared with your ventilation system, knowing your system, how high your air filters can go, having the vendor name written down and preparing yourself. So we kind of segregate it into preparedness, response, and recovery. So preparedness would be actually having the plan in place already. And then kind of having a chain of command in your response team, who are your vendors that can assist you? Who is the contractor that will be able to bring in extra HEPA air filtration devices? Because believe me, when a wildfire hits, those are key to continuing business. So they are very hard to find. So knowing the vendor, having that contact information available, knowing how many you would need and where you would be placing them is also very, very important. Just saying I want 4 2000 CFM units is not necessarily going to help you if you have small rooms you're trying to put them in and it's too loud for people to continuing work, or you're just going to segregate certain areas of the building and say, we're going to continue business in these areas, and these ones we're not going to worry about because we can't even, there's no way we're going to be able to continue business operations or filter the air appropriately for people to feel comfortable while working. Cleaning, people, you know, you may have your EVS staff, but do you need additional staff to be involved? Is it, you know, heavy accumulations where you know that just the EVS staff is not trained enough to potentially do the work? Having all their names, contact info, when you plan on contacting these individuals, when the AQI goes over 200 is when you start doing this. What is your chain of command and who's going to be doing what? Training, making sure that everyone is aware of the actual plan, because as we know, people like to put plans on, look at them ever again. That's not going to be helpful. We need to know who's going to be responsible for it, training people on what the plan includes and what they're responsible in terms of doing it, in terms of responsibilities. And then HVAC maintenance, because HVAC system is probably your best control to reduce exposures. You need to make sure that that's properly always being maintained so that when a wildfire hits, we're not worrying about, oh, well, this is no longer in place and this is not going on. Just always maintaining it and making sure that it is prepared for any issues and understanding the system too. Again, if your filters can only fit, you know, a MERV rating of 8, you know, saying I'm going to put extra filtration in there may not work because your system is not prepared for that. So understanding your limitation is also very important, because then again, maybe that's not an area you're going to want to have people to continue working in. Supplies and inventory, making sure you have enough stuff available, having those filters stored that you are going to be using, stored already in the facility. Sticky mats, that's a good way to try to prevent additional exposure wildfires. So maybe putting it at the entryways of all the exterior entry points, having those available and already for you. Evacuation plans, landscape plans, looking outside your facility already. I think it's calfire.gov, or one of the fire department website has really good documentation on how you can look at your building and your property and ways to reduce potential burning of that property due to wildfires. So looking at mulch is like the big thing, right? You shouldn't be putting mulch around your house. It's like it's pretty. I have it around mine too, but you know, it's a good incinerator to, you know, create more of the fire and continue the burning of the space. And the chemical inventory, again, a big thing you're going to want to know. And you should most of you probably already have this all done, but kind of have an understanding of how much chemicals you have stored and where they are. Because if you are one that actually has the fire reaching your property, the fire department is going to want to know where that is located to make sure that they're protecting themselves as well as others in the space. And although this is probably something that doesn't happen as often, it's just background monitoring. Because again, if we're going to be evaluating the impact with air monitoring during the fire event, we're going to want to know what is the background levels in your facility prior to that. So are we seeing a large increase? Is a filtration system doing what it's supposed to be doing? Or is it similar just to background levels? So response. So now that the wildfire has hit and we have poor air quality in our community, in our area, what can we do to try to control that fire smoke from coming into our space? Number one, we want to close off the outdoor air intakes, which goes against all of what we always say in healthcare, right? Especially with COVID, everyone's opening them 100%. If you actually read the Cal OSHA standard for COVID, they tell you can they always tell you open all your outdoor air, introduce as much as possible, unless the air quality is poor. And I think they use a AQI of 101 or something even smaller than the 151 for the California wildfire standard. So it is allowed. People don't think that. They think they need to keep it open, but it's the lesser of evils, I guess. Or at that point, how, you know, what are we going to look at in terms of trying to control exposures to be pros? So if we shut out the outdoor air intakes, yes, we can get accumulation of carbon dioxide, which causes that stuffiness. Maybe we get accumulations of some of the chemicals that are being used. But again, we're trying to outweigh the hazard of the smoke entering because those particulates, especially the fine particulates, can enter into the lungs and into the bloodstream and cause impact, especially to the sensitive populations, which you are housing the majority of. It may impact anesthesia. We've heard that anesthesiologists have said that carbon dioxide is something they typically want to control in their operate to ensure that the anesthesia gas is being supplied appropriately. So again, these are conversations that need to happen beforehand with your staff. So when you are creating a plan, you're not necessarily just using facilities and maintenance. It's a combination of all the different groups within the medical center. So think about, everyone knows by now, seen tons of talks on the water quality, right? Think about that, group of multidisciplinary people. You're talking to infection prevention, you're talking to the specific departments in which that there will be sensitive people, oncology departments, and what they need and what they think would impact their staff and patients. Inspecting filters frequently, looking for that overloading. So we know that the more particulates that enter a filter, the better the filter efficiency. However, we don't want that overloading to occur where you get the bypass. So it's that fine line of letting it do its work and doing better than it should, but making sure that if we start to get those high overloadings, that we're changing the filters out. If we have the ability to place higher efficiency filters, carbon filters, they may help a little bit with the odors, but not necessarily as much with the particulates. So a lot of people like them. I mean, to me, they reduce stuff just a little bit. I don't think they're as, sometimes they don't do as great as I think they say they will. So, additional controls, just minimizing any outdoor from entering by maybe reducing the amount of entry points. And again, COVID has done that for us. Where we're no longer just letting anybody walk any part of the building. We've kind of got localized locations, and that will help because every time you open a door, it's coming in. Hospitals, again, don't usually have operable windows. Some older facilities may have in MOB buildings, but shutting those, making sure that they're completely sealed. Sometimes you might get leakage. If you get leakage, then maybe we're cordoning off that room and nobody's occupying that space. As I say, sticky mats, probably putting those in locations where you can reduce people from bringing it into their shoes. And then also the introduction of the HEPA air filtration devices. And so bringing those in, again, they work great, but they need to be thought of where you're going to put them, which ones you're using. It's important. They're loud. They're very loud sometimes, and that really will bother, especially if you have those sensitive populations in certain departments where you have the quiet times and you don't want the noise to be in that specific space. Increase cleaning efforts during wildfire events, particularly looking at those areas that we know are the pathways. So those, near doors, maybe any windows that may be leaking, any location that we know that it could potentially get in. And we want to clean it using damp methods, HEPA vacuums, regular vacuums usually just suck it in and spit it back out. So we want to make sure we're using high efficiency filters. We know that it may require more cleaning than you normally are used to. Hospitals are very clean, but maybe increasing the schedule just a little bit more, or at least in areas we know that there may be a higher accumulation or where stuff may potentially be coming in. Sometimes this requires the use of outside support because you just can't get to all of it. It's too much going on and your EVS staff is already stretched with the amount of work that they have to do. And again, depending on the accumulation of dust, maybe there's a large amount and you're worried about personal protective equipment and you want someone to be protected who may be wearing respirators because there's large accumulations that they need to clean up. And when trying to identify where these areas of impact are, again, we can use our sensory observations. Do we visibly see it? Do we smell it? Do we see the smoke-related particulate, the char, and the ash? We all pretty much know what that is. Think about a cigarette and the ash that's created from that. So that's what the particulates can look like. What we can also do is air monitoring. So I will start with, this is not a perfect science. There is no specific standard that says this is what your air level should be indoors, even anywhere, and even further within a healthcare facility. There is no numbers. So as we already know, when outdoors air levels are really high, we're going to have increased level indoors. But what does that mean? You know, there's no definitive standard. We can look at background levels and see if there's a large change. But it doesn't necessarily tell us, is it safe, which is a question everyone knows. Is it safe to be in here? You know, we rarely have that type of information. So there's two types of monitoring that you can do. Each of them can be used depending on some of the questions you're trying to ask. When you do air monitoring for particulates, you can do what's called mass concentration, where you're getting the results in milligrams per cubic meter, or you can do the particle count, where you're getting number of particles per liter. So if you do the mass concentration, you can compare that data that you're getting to those AQI values. It's important to know that AQI value is not a concentration; it's an actual number that they equate to a specific correction factor. So I don't know what the specific, I think it's like 15 micrograms per cubic meter is representative of an AQI value of 151. But you can use those values because you can look at the numbers and say, is it good? You know, healthy, unhealthy, the sensitive populations, unhealthy, hazardous. You have a range to look at. Although that data is for outdoor air, it can be used indoors, you know, as appropriate. And it does kind of give you that sensitive population type of distinguishing, which is really important in healthcare because you want to make sure not just healthy, but healthy for sensitive populations as well is very important. You can also do particle count. So if anybody's done any clean room assessments for USP or 797, we look at the ISO standards 5, 6, 7, 8. And we can compare our data to that. So sometimes mass concentrations we'll just do in general environments, but if we're doing an evaluation of an operating room or the pharmacy department, we may switch monitors and do the actual particle counts. So here's an example of like a report that we'll do where we're measuring the concentrations and our results ranged from 105 to 1400 micrograms per cubic meter. So when that equates to an AQI value of unhealthy for sensitive populations to hazardous using the PM 2.5, the particulate size data. And the same thing, indoor concentrations range from 24 to 77. So we have our outdoor that we measured, and then we show you as well as indoors. It's nasty outdoors, hazardous in some locations outdoors. However, indoors we're getting an average of 53 micrograms, which equates to good to unhealthy for sensitive populations. So at least you can have some information to kind of understand where you're at with your facility. And here's, you know, once we've got that information, we have some recommendations on how you can try to reduce exposures to the extent that we can identify. So we found that the readings were higher at the doors or in this specific room, then you can make recommendations. Okay, we're not using that room, or maybe we're bringing the HEPA air filtration device into this room because we need it to continually be used, but we know we're getting levels that we don't feel comfortable with. And then we have nice little pretty graphs sometimes that we create for this and spreadsheets. So kind of, again, it's just kind of showing and outlining what it would look like color coordinated based on the AQI color coordination. Here are the values we are getting outdoors. And then once you get indoors, these are the levels or concentrations we are getting, which are then converted to the AQI values. And same thing here's with the particle counter. We're looking at the ISO class and then comparing it to the particle counts and using that data to identify, is it considered ISO class 5 room or, you know, ISO class 8, depending on the specific location, to help you in understanding how your environment is when you're continually operating during the wildfire event. We can also do surface dust samplings, not necessarily common for hospitals because, again, you're cleaning so often, there's so much being done. It takes a little bit longer to get the data. With the other two monitors, those are direct reading instruments. You're seeing that right away. If you're collecting surface dust samples, those are being sent to a laboratory. They're looking under a microscope and they're characterizing the dust. So, I mean, 24 hours is probably the earliest you can get it, but believe you, in a wildfire, they're inundated with work as well. So sometimes it doesn't get us what we want, but it's available. And sometimes people want to commission a new area and say it's been cleaned after the fact. This is a form that you can do both in the air and the surface level. Again, there are no specific standards associated with wildfires and comparing the data both in the surface or in the air. All we have to do is rely on, the AQI values and ISO standards and information that makes it relevant for the wildfires and determining the air quality in the space. Now recovery. So after the fact, you've already had the wildfire event, you've done everything you could to reduce exposure. Now, once in the recovery, you want to identify the criteria for continuing returning to work. So maybe some people have left the facility, and during the 2019 fires, a lot in the Bay Area that occurred, some of the hospitals had to evacuate. So how do we get them to return? How are we feeling comfortable? How are we educating them on what happened, how much we cleaned, and is it safe to return to the space? Because a lot of the times, if you were evacuated, the fire got pretty close to you. And if it did, that means that although the fire is out, you still have a lot of the burn area surrounding your facility. So when the winds come up again, that particulate comes again. Yes, it's at a lesser degree, but you will be continually impacted for some period of time until rains occur and new vegetation happens. So it's important to kind of give them an understanding and educate them on what you're doing and what's occurring and what to expect. Also, to continue to do air and surface cleaning because of that same issue. There is a potential for residual particulate to continue to infiltrate into the facility. So you need to continue monitoring that, visually looking at it. Do you smell anything? And then maybe potentially do additional air sampling or surface sampling just to confirm, and then begin your full services again. And then discuss some of, the operational challenges and costs. So there's different challenges and costs during the fire, and after the fact. So what are the costs associated with your HVAC system, adding all these extra filters to the space or changing them out more, a little bit more often than you normally do. What about the challenges with patients if you have to evacuate them from the facility and then making sure that's okay for them to return? Security issues. These are just a list of things that people should be thinking about. Support systems, not only do they have to worry about the fire and the health, but mental impact associated with that. If someone's working and trying to continue work in a safe environment, but they're worried their house is going to be burned down, understanding that they may want to leave because they're fearful of their home or their neighbors or their family members. So having that understanding is very important, and it could be a challenge in continuing the work. And then the emergency response vendors, again, you may have them on your list, but they're in need and in high demand during that time. So kind of looking over just the costs associated with that, but availability and any challenges you saw. So kind of doing an audit of your system and your program after the fire event itself to make sure that, when the next one happens, because it's going to happen, what you plan on doing to try to run it a little bit smoother and make sure everything's okay. So again, the question, is it safe? So people always want to know, is it safe? How is the air in there? Can we continue working? And the answer is it's not perfect. It's not like it normally is, but it's a heck of a lot better here than any other facility that you would go to. It's going to be better than when you're at your home because, again, you have such a sophisticated mechanical system and cleaning just facility in terms of staff. Yes, it's going to be better here, even patients as well. It's going to be better here than most places. So just continuing and adding a little bit more efforts is a way to continually try to reduce the impact and make it even safer for people. And then the question, can we operate? Can we continue services? Well, again, this is discussions that need to be had before the wildfire actually occurs. So understanding, again, the issues with if we shut the outdoor air intakes, can you continue your services? Will it change anything in the environment that will impact you giving the patients the care that they need? What we would always suggest is any elective surgeries or anything that's not necessary, that be postponed to a later time, and that only things that are necessary and that are emergency surgeries that need to occur to have done. But again, this is information you're going to want to talk with your nursing staff, the doctors, everybody to kind of gain an understanding of what's going to occur, what you can allow, and what would you postpone. And so during major events like wildfires, impact to operations can be significant. So we have a document here we've created, but kind of goes over some of the steps that need to be done to control the air from entering in the building and, causing smoke impact inside in your facility and potentially harming some of the patients in the space and the staff. So it kind of goes over some of the actions that should be taken in advance and happen immediately, and goes over some of, when are our return to normal operations going to be occurring. And that's about it. So, again, our objectives, hopefully were met. We would wanted to talk a little bit about the hazard components, some of the key elements, some of the suggestions on how you can minimize impact, as well as ways to evaluate the indoor air quality and cleanliness. Any questions? Yeah, questions? No? You can talk to me later if you have one.
For the wildfires, we have the water, like, flood, or went freely, that, water.
In some areas, in Paradise, they had the issue where they had old PVC pipes for the municipal or some specific type of pipe where the heat was so hot, it did melt and did impact their municipal water supply. I haven't really seen that or experienced that in more of the, industrial areas, such as, in California, where they're having that type of issue. But it could occur, because you do get runoff too.
With Illinois, Texas, and
Mhm. Yeah, this is just, the initial. And even impact to electronics, when you get, although typically wildfire is not acidic particulate because it's burning of organic materials, but as I stated, now you're burning a lot of structures and materials, so there could be acidic particulate. And with that, when that goes and settles in on electronics or devices such as that, you can get malfunctions and things not working properly. So similar to water quality is a secondary issue caused by that. Not only that, water suppression methods, mold growth potentials as well. So